This is the story of how 88 innocent children were sent to gas chambers and 184 women were imprisoned in the wake of the assassination of one of the most notorious figures of the Nazi regime, Reinhard Heydrich. Known as the Butcher of Prague, Heydrich was a high-ranking Nazi official and one of the architects of the Holocaust. His assassination in 1942 by Czech resistance fighters marked a pivotal moment in World War II, but came with a horrendous cost: revenge that would devastate the small Czech village of Lidice.
In the aftermath of Heydrich's assassination, Nazi leaders including Adolf Hitler sought to send a chilling message to anyone who dared to challenge the Third Reich. Lidice, a village that had no direct connection to the assassination, was chosen as the scapegoat. The village's men, women, and children were brutally rounded up as part of a calculated act of revenge that sent shockwaves across Europe. This retaliation was not just a punishment. It was a grotesque display of power designed to crush the morale of those who dared to resist Nazi rule.
The Nazis wanted one thing: revenge. Following Heydrich's assassination, Hitler and his top generals wanted to make an example of Lidice to deter any future attempts to strike against their regime. But this wasn't about finding the actual perpetrators or bringing them to justice. It was about sending a gruesome message: cross the Nazis, and entire communities will pay the price. The village of Lidice was chosen almost arbitrarily. Though there was no direct evidence linking the villagers to Heydrich's assassination, the Nazi propaganda machine framed the village as a haven for resistance fighters. The goal was to destroy Lidice, erase its existence from history, and terrify anyone else who might consider resisting the Nazis. For Hitler and his regime, revenge was a tool, a psychological weapon aimed at breaking the will of the people under Nazi occupation. They didn't just want to kill. They wanted to do it in a way that would instill fear in every corner of Europe. In the immediate aftermath of Heydrich's assassination, the Nazis faced a frustrating reality: they couldn't find the actual assassins. Despite launching one of the largest manhunts in Nazi-occupied Europe, the resistance fighters who had carried out the assassination of Heydrich, codenamed Operation Anthropoid, were able to evade capture for weeks. The inability to capture the real culprits only fueled the Nazis' anger. They needed a target for their rage, and Lidice became the sacrificial lamb. The village was chosen not because of any concrete connection to Heydrich's death, but because of tenuous rumors and the Nazis' insatiable need for swift, visible retribution. In the eyes of the Nazi leadership, the longer the assassins remained at large, the more dangerous the resistance movement became. They needed to regain control, and that meant finding a target, any target, that they could punish immediately. On June 9, 1942, Nazi forces descended upon Lidice. The village was surrounded, and every man, woman, and child was rounded up in what would become one of the most infamous acts of collective punishment in history. The men of Lidice were the first to pay the ultimate price. A total of 173 men, aged 16 and above, were lined up in front of a barn and shot in cold blood. Their bodies were unceremoniously dumped into mass graves, while the Nazi officers watched with satisfaction. There were no trials, no formal charges, just brutal, immediate execution. The sound of gunfire echoed across the village, a stark reminder of Nazi vengeance. The women of Lidice, numbering 184, were not spared either. They were ripped from their homes and sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp, a place notorious for its harsh conditions, forced labor, and rampant cruelty. Many of these women would never see their families again, subjected to starvation, disease, and the endless brutality of the Nazi guards. But perhaps the most heart-wrenching atrocity was reserved for the children of Lidice. A total of 88 children were separated from their mothers, some of them mere toddlers, and sent to the Chelmno extermination camp. There, these innocent souls were herded into gas vans, where they were systematically murdered. These children had no understanding of why they were being punished. They were simply victims of the Nazi machine of death. Even after this horrific act of vengeance, the Nazis' bloodlust was not satiated. Lidice's destruction was intended to serve as a deterrent, but the result was far more complex. Instead of crushing the resistance, The massacre of Lidice and the murder of its children sparked outrage across the globe. News of Lidice's destruction spread quickly, and it became a symbol of Nazi barbarism and cruelty. International outrage was swift, and the Nazis faced a backlash they hadn't anticipated. Lidice became a rallying cry for resistance movements across Europe. Rather than quelling dissent, the massacre ignited a fire in the hearts of those still fighting against Nazi tyranny. Moreover, despite the Nazis' brutal attempt to eliminate the village from history, they failed to erase Lidice's legacy. After the war, efforts were made to rebuild Lidice, and memorials were erected to honor the victims. The Nazis' ultimate goal of silencing resistance through sheer terror had backfired. The assassination of Reinhard Heydrich was indeed a critical moment in World War II, but the revenge taken on the village of Lidice remains one of the most infamous war crimes committed by the Nazis. Though the men were murdered, the women were imprisoned, and the children were sent to the gas chambers, Lidice did not die. After the war, survivors and the international community made sure that the memory of Lidice lived on. The village was rebuilt as a symbol of defiance against tyranny. A new Lidice arose from the ashes of the old one, and today it stands as a reminder of the horrors of unchecked power and the resilience of the human spirit. But for the families of those who were lost, no memorial could ever truly erase the pain of what had happened. The massacre of Lidice and the murder of 88 children remain a permanent scar on the history of Europe. The Nazis may have sought to destroy Lidice, but in doing so, they created a lasting symbol of their brutality and a source of inspiration for those who continued to fight against their regime. The Nazi regime thought that the massacre of Lidice would serve as a warning to other resistance groups, but it had the opposite effect. The destruction of Lidice became a global symbol of Nazi cruelty, and after the war, Lidice was rebuilt in defiance of the Nazi effort to erase it from history. Instead of disappearing, Lidice became immortalized in books, documentaries, and memorials. But the most important legacy of Lidice was the international response. Resistance movements across Europe were galvanized by the massacre, and the Allies used it as a powerful propaganda tool to rally support for the war effort. The attempted annihilation of Lidice ultimately served to expose the Nazi regime's genocidal goals even further, uniting the world against their brutal reign. The massacre of Lidice was a crime of unparalleled cruelty. The village's men were shot execution style, with Nazi soldiers using the barn walls as a backdrop for the slaughter. The bodies were not given the dignity of a proper burial. They were tossed into shallow mass graves, left to rot without any form of respect or recognition. The execution was methodical, cold, and devoid of any humanity, a signature of Nazi operations. The women's imprisonment at Ravensbrück was a different kind of hell. Starved, overworked, and subjected to brutal beatings, many of the women perished in the camp's brutal conditions. The guards, known for their sadism, took pleasure in tormenting the prisoners, making Ravensbrück one of the deadliest camps for female prisoners during the Holocaust. But the most horrifying aspect was the fate of the children. The 88 children of Lidice were not just murdered, they were rounded up, forced into gas fans at Chelmno, and killed in what can only be described as an assembly line method of execution. Their small bodies were discarded without a second thought. The fact that the Nazis specifically targeted children for their revenge only serves to highlight the depth of their cruelty. The revenge for the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich marked one of the darkest moments in the history of World War II. The massacre of Lidice, the execution of its men, the imprisonment of its women, and the murder of 88 innocent children remain a haunting reminder of the horrors of the Nazi regime. But in their attempt to eradicate the village, the Nazis instead created a lasting symbol of resistance and resilience. Lidice stands today as a testament to the unbreakable spirit of those who resist oppression. The village's destruction was meant to instill fear, but instead, it sparked outrage and solidarity among those fighting for freedom. Though the Nazis sought to erase Lidice, they only succeeded in making it immortal, a powerful symbol of defiance against tyranny.